The morning sun cast long shadows across the cobblestone streets of the ancient city as Captain Marcus Aurelius made his rounds. The Royal Guard had been his life for 15 years, and he knew every corner, every alley, and every sound that belonged to the peaceful kingdom. His armor clinked softly with each measured step, the golden emblem of the crown gleaming on his chest. The people respected him. Children waved from windows and merchants nodded respectfully as he passed their stalls. But this morning felt different. There was an unusual tension in the air, like the moment before a storm breaks. Marcus had learned to trust his instincts over the years, and something was telling him to stay alert. The kingdom had been at peace for decades, but peace could be fragile, and it was his duty to protect it. As he turned the corner near the old cathedral, a sound pierced the morning calm. It was faint at first, almost lost among the usual sounds of the waking city, but Marcus stopped in his tracks. His trained ear had caught something that made his blood run cold. It was the cry of a child, but not the usual sound of play or minor upset. This was different. This was terror. The cry came again, more desperate this time, echoing off the stone walls of the narrow alleyway. Marcus felt his heart rate quicken. In all his years of service, he had heard many sounds of distress, but there was something about a child's frightened cry that cut through every barrier, every protocol, every careful procedure he had been trained to follow. Without hesitation, Marcus began moving toward the sound. His heavy boots echoed against the cobblestones as he quickened his pace. The cry seemed to be coming from somewhere near the old market district, where the buildings crowded together and created a maze of narrow passages and hidden courtyards. As he ran, Marcus thought about his own childhood. He had grown up in these very streets, the son of a blacksmith who worked long hours to put food on the table. He remembered the fear he had felt as a small boy when he got lost in the winding alleys, how the tall buildings seemed to close in around him, how every shadow seemed to hide a threat. But he also remembered the day when a royal guard had found him crying and scared, had knelt down to his level and spoken gently until the fear went away. That guard had walked him home, and that single act of kindness had changed the course of Marcus's entire life. The cry came again, weaker now, as if the child was losing hope. Marcus felt a surge of determination. Whatever was happening, wherever this child was, he would find them. He would help them. It was not just his duty as a royal guard, it was his duty as a human being. He reached the market district and paused, listening carefully. The morning vendors were just beginning to set up their stalls, and the usual bustle was starting to build. But underneath all the normal sounds, he could still hear it. The child's cry coming from somewhere deeper in the maze of alleys. Marcus began to move more carefully now, using his ears as much as his eyes. The sound seemed to be coming from the direction of the old warehouse district, where the buildings were older and many stood empty. It was not a place where children usually played, which made the situation even more concerning. As he made his way through the narrow passages, Marcus began to notice other things that troubled him. There were signs of a struggle near one of the buildings. Some wooden crates had been overturned, and there were scuff marks in the dirt that suggested someone had been dragged. His military training kicked in, and he began to assess the situation more tactically. The cry came again, and this time Marcus was able to pinpoint its location more precisely. It was coming from an old stone building that had once been a grain storage facility. The building had been abandoned for years, its windows boarded up and its doors supposedly locked. But as Marcus approached, he could see that one of the side doors was slightly ajar. He drew his sword, not because he wanted to fight, but because 15 years of experience had taught him to be prepared for anything. The cry was clearer now, definitely coming from inside the building. But there was something else too. Voices. Adult voices speaking in low, urgent tones. Marcus felt his anger beginning to build. If someone was hurting a child, if someone had taken a child against their will, they would answer to him. But he forced himself to remain calm and think strategically. Rushing in without a plan could make the situation worse and put the child in greater danger. He moved closer to the building, staying in the shadows, trying to get a better sense of what was happening inside. The child's cry had become more of a whimper now, which somehow made it even more heartbreaking. Every instinct in his body was screaming at him to act, to do something to make the crying stop. As he reached the door, Marcus could hear the adult voices more clearly. There were at least 2 men inside, possibly 3. They were arguing about something, but he couldn't make out the words. What he could hear clearly was the sound of the child's distress, and it was getting stronger. Marcus took a deep breath and prepared himself for whatever he might find inside that building. He thought about his oath as a royal guard, about his duty to protect the innocent and defend those who could not defend themselves. He thought about the guard who had helped him all those years ago, and about the difference that one person could make in a child's life. The morning sun was fully up now, casting bright light across the city. But inside that old building, darkness reigned, and somewhere in that darkness a child was crying for help. Marcus gripped his sword tighter and stepped toward the door, ready to bring light into the darkness, ready to answer that cry with swift and decisive action. Marcus pushed the door open just wide enough to slip inside, his armor making the slightest whisper of sound against the wooden frame. The interior of the abandoned building was dimly lit, with dusty beams of sunlight filtering through cracks in the boarded windows. The air smelled of old wood and neglect, but underneath it all was something else that made his stomach turn. Fear. The sharp, acrid smell of human terror. His eyes quickly adjusted to the dim light, and what he saw made his jaw clench with barely controlled rage. In the center of the room, a small boy of perhaps 6 or 7 years old sat tied to a wooden chair. The child's clothes were torn and dirty, his face streaked with tears and his eyes wide with the kind of terror that no child should ever experience. Around him stood 3 men, their backs currently turned to the door as they argued in heated whispers. Marcus could see immediately that these were not common thieves or desperate men driven to crime by hunger. Their clothes, though travel-worn, were of good quality. Their weapons were well maintained. These were professionals, and that made them infinitely more dangerous. But it also meant they were likely more concerned with their mission than with watching their surroundings, which gave Marcus a crucial advantage. The child's eyes suddenly met his through the gloom, and Marcus saw a flicker of hope replace some of the terror. The boy opened his mouth as if to call out, but Marcus quickly pressed a finger to his lips in the universal signal for silence. The last thing he needed was to alert the kidnappers before he was ready to act. The child, showing remarkable courage for his age, nodded slightly and remained quiet. Marcus studied the 3 men more carefully. The largest one, clearly the leader, wore a sword at his side and carried himself with military bearing. The second man was smaller but moved with the quick, nervous energy of someone accustomed to violence. The third man stood guard near what appeared to be another exit on the far side of the room. All 3 were armed, and all 3 stood between Marcus and the child. The conversation between the men was becoming more heated, and Marcus caught fragments that made his blood run cold. They were talking about a ransom, about a message to be delivered to the royal court. This was not a random crime. This was a deliberate act against the crown itself, and this innocent child was being used as a weapon in some larger political game. Marcus felt the familiar calm that came over him in dangerous situations. His years of training kicked in and his mind began to work with cold precision. 3 armed men in a confined space with an innocent hostage who could be hurt if the situation went wrong. It was not ideal, but he had faced worse odds before. The largest man suddenly turned toward the door and Marcus had to make a split-second decision. He could try to remain hidden and gather more information, or he could act now while he still had the element of surprise. The choice was made for him when the man's eyes fell on the slightly open door and his hand moved instinctively toward his sword. "We have company," the man said in a low, dangerous voice. Marcus stepped fully into the room, his own sword already drawn, his shield raised. "Release the child," he said, his voice carrying the full authority of his position. "Release him now and you will be treated with the mercy befitting prisoners. Harm him, and you will face the full wrath of the royal guard." The 3 men spread out immediately, showing they were indeed professionals. But Marcus also noticed something else. The way they moved, the way they positioned themselves told him they had not expected to face a royal guard. They had planned for palace guards perhaps, or city constables. But not for someone with his level of training and experience. 1 guard against 3, the leader said with a cold smile. "I like those odds." "Then you don't know me very well," Marcus replied, never taking his eyes off the men but staying aware of the child's position. "I am Captain Marcus Aurelius of the Royal Guard, and I have sworn an oath to protect the innocent." That child leaves this room safely, or none of you leave at all." The second man, the nervous one, laughed harshly. "Big words from one man. Do you really think you can take all three of us?" Marcus didn't answer with words. Instead, he moved. 15 years of training and experience had taught him that in situations like this, hesitation was death. He lunged forward, not at the leader as they expected, but at the nervous man who had spoken. The unexpected move caught them off guard, and Marcus's sword found its mark before the man could properly defend himself. The remaining two men recovered quickly, but Marcus was already moving again. He used his shield to block the leader's attack, while simultaneously striking at the third man. The confined space of the room worked both for and against him. It limited his movement, but it also made it harder for his opponents to coordinate their attacks effectively. The fight was brutal and quick. These men were skilled, but they were not prepared for the controlled fury of a royal guard protecting an innocent child. Marcus fought with a precision born of years of training and a determination fueled by righteous anger. Every blow he struck was calculated, every movement designed to bring him closer to his goal of freeing the child. The leader was the last to fall, and even as he lay defeated, he spat defiance. "You think this ends anything? This is bigger than one child, bigger than one guard. You have no idea what forces you're dealing with." Marcus knelt beside the man, his sword at the defeated leader's throat. "I know enough," he said quietly. "I know that innocent children should not pay the price for the ambitions of adults. I know that justice will be served." But even as he spoke, Marcus was already turning his attention to the child. The boy was still tied to the chair, still trembling with fear, but the terror in his eyes had been replaced by something else. Hope. Trust. The kind of absolute faith that children place in adults who show them kindness in their darkest moments. "It's all right," Marcus said gently as he began to untie the ropes. "You're safe now. I'm going to take you home." The child looked up at him with eyes that seemed far too old for such a young face. "Are you really a royal guard?" he whispered. "I am," Marcus replied, carefully working at the knots, "and it is my duty and my honor to protect you." As the last rope fell away, the child threw his arms around Marcus's neck, holding on as if his life depended on it. And perhaps it did. In that moment, Marcus felt the weight of his responsibility not just as a guard, but as a protector of innocence itself. Marcus lifted the trembling child into his arms, feeling the boy's small hands clutch desperately at his armor. The child was lighter than he should have been, suggesting he had not been fed properly during his captivity. This detail only added to Marcus's growing anger at the men who lay defeated on the floor behind them. "What's your name, young one?" Marcus asked gently as he carried the boy toward the door, careful to shield him from the sight of the fallen kidnappers. "Thomas," the child whispered, his voice barely audible. "Thomas Millbrook. My papa is the court scribe." Marcus nodded, understanding flooding through him. The court scribe had access to important documents, schedules, and communications. Taking his son would have been leverage for information or influence within the royal court. The plot was becoming clearer, but right now his priority was getting Thomas to safety. As they stepped out of the building into the bright morning sunlight, Thomas blinked and buried his face against Marcus's shoulder. The boy had probably been kept in darkness for days, and the sudden brightness was overwhelming. Marcus adjusted his grip, making sure the child felt secure, and began walking back toward the main streets of the city. "How long were you in there, Thomas?" Marcus asked softly. 3 days, came the muffled reply. "Maybe 4. It's hard to tell when it's always dark. 3 days. Marcus felt his anger flare again. 3 days of terror for a child who should have been playing with friends and learning his letters. 3 days of anguish for parents who must have been going out of their minds with worry and fear. As they walked, Marcus began to notice other things. There were people in the streets who looked at them strangely, not with the usual respect shown to a royal guard, but with something closer to relief. A woman selling bread at a street corner actually crossed herself when she saw them pass. An old man sitting on his doorstep stood up and bowed deeply. "Sir Marcus," called out a voice from behind them. Marcus turned to see a young palace messenger running toward them, his face flushed with exertion. "Sir Marcus, thank the heavens we found you." "What is it, boy?" Marcus asked, though he suspected he already knew. "The court scribe, sir. He's been beside himself. His son went missing 3 days ago, and there's been no word, no ransom demand, nothing. The whole court is in an uproar. Some are saying it's the beginning of a plot against the crown itself. Marcus nodded grimly. Tell the court scribe that his son is safe. Tell him to meet us at the palace gates, and send word to the captain of guards that we have 3 prisoners who need to be questioned immediately. This was not the work of common criminals. The messenger's eyes widened as he took in the full significance of what Marcus was saying. Sir, are you saying this was treason? I'm saying that someone used an innocent child as a weapon against the royal court, Marcus replied. And that someone is going to answer for it. As the messenger ran off to deliver his news, Marcus continued walking toward the palace. Thomas had grown heavier in his arms, not from weight but from exhaustion. The child was finally beginning to relax, to believe that he was truly safe, and the emotional toll of his ordeal was catching up with him. Sir Marcus, Thomas said quietly, lifting his head to look at the guard's face. Why did those men take me? I never did anything to hurt them. It was the question Marcus had been dreading. Because how do you explain the cruelty and ambition of adults to a child who still believes the world is fundamentally good and fair? Sometimes, Thomas, there are people who make very bad choices, Marcus said carefully. They took you not because of anything you did, but because they wanted to hurt your father and frighten the people he works with. But the important thing is that you're safe now, and those men will never be able to hurt you or anyone else again. Will they go to jail? Thomas asked. They will face justice, Marcus assured him. The king's justice, which means they will be punished for their crimes in a way that fits what they did. As they approached the palace district, Marcus could see a crowd gathering near the gates. Word was spreading quickly, as it always did in the close-knit community of the royal court. But at the front of the crowd, pacing back and forth like a caged animal, was a man Marcus recognized immediately. Edmund Millbrook, the court scribe, was a thin, scholarly man who spent his days with books and documents. But the man Marcus saw now was transformed by 3 days of anguish into someone barely recognizable. When Edmund saw them approaching, he let out a cry that was part joy and part anguish. He ran toward them, his usually neat robes flying behind him, tears streaming down his face. Thomas, he called out. My boy, my dear boy. Marcus carefully set Thomas down, but kept a steadying hand on the child's shoulder as father and son embraced. The emotion of the moment was overwhelming, and Marcus found himself having to look away as Edmund held his son and wept openly. I thought I had lost you forever, Edmund whispered into his son's hair. I thought I would never see you again. Papa, Thomas said, his own tears starting to flow again. The bad men are gone. Sir Marcus made them go away. Edmund looked up at Marcus with eyes full of gratitude that no words could adequately express. Captain Aurelius, he said, his voice shaking with emotion. How can I ever thank you? How can any of us ever thank you? Marcus felt uncomfortable with the praise and attention. He had simply done his duty, nothing more. There is no need for thanks, Master Millbrook. I was simply in the right place at the right time. Any member of the royal guard would have done the same. But even as he said the words, Marcus knew they were not entirely true. Yes, any guard would have tried to help, but not every guard would have acted so quickly, so decisively. Not every guard would have been willing to face 3 armed men alone to save 1 child. The crowd around them was growing larger, and Marcus could see that word of the rescue was spreading throughout the palace. Soon there would be questions, investigations, and all the complications that came with matters involving potential threats to the crown. But for now, in this moment, there was just a father holding his son, and the knowledge that sometimes good triumphs over evil, sometimes the innocent are protected, sometimes a single act of courage can make all the difference in the world. Thomas looked up at Marcus one more time, his small face serious despite his tears. Sir Marcus, he said, when I grow up, I want to be just like you. Marcus knelt down to the child's level, just as that other guard had done for him so many years ago. Thomas, he said gently, be better than me. Be the kind of person who protects others not because it's his job, but because it's the right thing to do. The great hall of the palace buzzed with tension as news of the rescue spread through every corridor and chamber. King William himself had called for an immediate audience with Marcus, and the entire royal court was gathering to hear the details of what many were already calling an act of exceptional heroism. But Marcus felt no joy in the attention. His mind was focused on the larger implications of what had happened. As he stood before the throne, still wearing his battle-worn armor, Marcus could see the concern etched on the king's weathered face. King William had ruled for 30 years, and he had seen enough of politics and intrigue to understand that the kidnapping of a court scribe's son was no random act of criminal desperation. "Captain Aurelius," the king said, his voice carrying clearly through the silent hall, "we have heard remarkable things about your actions this morning. Tell us in your own words what transpired." Marcus straightened, feeling the weight of every eye in the hall upon him. "Your Majesty, I was conducting my morning patrol when I heard a child's cry of distress. Following the sound, I discovered young Thomas Millbrook being held captive by 3 armed men in an abandoned warehouse. After ensuring the child's safety, I was able to apprehend the criminals." The king leaned forward slightly. "3 armed men, and you faced them alone?" "Yes, Your Majesty." The situation required immediate action, and there was no time to summon assistance without risking harm to the child. A murmur rippled through the assembled courtiers, even in a court accustomed to tales of valor and duty. The idea of one man facing 3 armed kidnappers was remarkable. But Marcus noticed that not everyone in the hall looked pleased by his actions. Some faces showed concern, others calculation, and a few showed something that looked suspiciously like disappointment. "Have the prisoners been questioned?" the king asked. "They are being interrogated now, Your Majesty. However, from what I overheard, this appears to be part of a larger plot targeting the royal court. They mentioned delivering a message to the crown, and their professional manner suggests they were not acting independently." The king's expression grew grave. "Master Edmund," he called out, gesturing for the court scribe to step forward. "How much access does your position give you to sensitive court business?" Edmund Millbrook looked pale and shaken, but he answered clearly. "Your Majesty, as court scribe I have access to most official correspondence, scheduling documents, and many royal decrees before they are made public. I also maintain the records of court proceedings and diplomatic communications." The implications hung heavy in the air. If the kidnappers had successfully forced Edmund to cooperate, they would have had access to information that could compromise the security of the entire kingdom. They would know the king's schedule, his plans, his correspondence with other rulers. "Captain Aurelius," the king continued, "do you believe this threat has been fully contained?" Marcus hesitated before answering. His instincts, honed by years of experience, were telling him that something was not quite right. The 3 men he had captured had seemed surprised to face a royal guard, but they had not seemed surprised to be discovered. It was as if they had expected to be caught eventually, as if being captured was part of their plan. "Your Majesty," Marcus said carefully, "I believe we have prevented immediate harm to Master Edmund's family, and potentially to the court itself. However, I would recommend increased security measures until we can be certain that these 3 men were acting alone." As he spoke, Marcus noticed movement in the crowd. A man in the dress of a minor court official was slowly making his way toward one of the side exits. There was something about the man's manner, something about the way he was trying not to draw attention to himself, that set off alarms in Marcus's mind. The king was still speaking, outlining the measures that would be taken to investigate the plot and ensure the safety of the court. But Marcus was no longer fully listening. His attention was focused on the man who was now almost at the exit, moving with the careful casualness of someone who desperately wanted to leave, but didn't want to appear to be fleeing. Marcus made a decision that would later be called either brilliant intuition or reckless abandon. In the middle of the king's speech, he stepped forward and called out in a voice that carried to every corner of the hall, "Stop that man!" The effect was instantaneous and dramatic. The man at the exit broke into a run, confirming Marcus's suspicions. 2 palace guards moved to intercept him, but the man was ready for that. He produced a dagger from somewhere in his robes and slashed at the guards, opening a path to the door. The hall erupted into chaos as courtiers scrambled to get out of the way and guards rushed toward the disturbance. But Marcus was already moving. He had spotted something that others had missed. The fleeing man was heading not for the main exit, but for a smaller door that led to the royal quarters. This was not a panicked escape. This was a purposeful attempt to reach a specific target. Marcus's longer legs and superior conditioning allowed him to close the distance quickly. As the man reached for the door handle, Marcus tackled him to the ground. The 2 men rolled across the marble floor, fighting for control of the dagger that was still clutched in the assassin's hand. The fight was brief but vicious. The man was skilled with a knife, but Marcus had the advantages of size, strength, and training. More importantly, Marcus was fighting to protect his king and his kingdom, while his opponent was fighting only for his own life. When it was over, the would-be assassin lay unconscious on the floor, the dagger knocked from his hand and several feet away. Marcus stood up slowly, breathing hard, and found himself facing a hall full of stunned courtiers and a king whose expression had shifted from concern to something approaching awe. "How did you know?" King William asked quietly. "He was leaving, Your Majesty," Marcus replied, straightening his armor. "In the middle of your speech about investigating a plot against the court, he was trying to leave quietly. Innocent men don't flee when justice is being discussed." The king nodded slowly. "And you believed he was heading for the royal quarters?" "Yes, Your Majesty. I believe the kidnapping was meant to serve two purposes. First, to gather information from Master Edmund about court security and your schedule. Second, to provide a distraction that would allow this man to get close enough to attempt an assassination." A chill settled over the hall as the full scope of the plot became clear. If Marcus had not heard Thomas's cry that morning, if he had not acted so quickly and decisively, the conspiracy might very well have succeeded. The court scribe would have been forced to provide information, and in the chaos of searching for his son, security around the king would have been disrupted enough to give an assassin his chance. King William stood up from his throne, an action that brought every person in the hall to attention. "Captain Marcus Aurelius," he said in a voice that carried the full weight of royal authority, "you have this day performed not one, but two acts of exceptional service to the crown. You have saved the life of an innocent child, and you have preserved the safety of the realm itself." Marcus knelt on one knee as protocol demanded. "I have simply done my duty, Your Majesty." "You have done far more than duty requires," the king replied, "and your service will be remembered and rewarded accordingly." But even as the king spoke these words of praise and promised rewards, Marcus's mind was already turning to the future. 2 assassination attempts had been thwarted, but that did not mean the threat was over. Someone had planned this elaborate conspiracy, someone with resources and inside knowledge of the court. Until that person was found and stopped, the danger would remain. The interrogation chambers beneath the palace had seen many criminals over the years, but rarely had they held prisoners whose capture had saved both a child's life and a kingdom's stability. Marcus stood in the shadows watching as the king's most skilled questioners worked on the 4 men who had been involved in the conspiracy. 3 kidnappers and 1 would-be assassin, all professional in their silence, all refusing to reveal who had hired them or what the ultimate goal had been. Marcus had been questioning suspects for years, and he recognized the signs. These men had been trained to resist interrogation. They had been prepared for capture. More troubling still, they showed no fear of death, which suggested they believed their cause was worth dying for, or that they feared their masters more than they feared the king's justice. "They're not talking," said Captain Harrison, the head of palace security, as he joined Marcus in the observation chamber. "We've tried everything short of torture, and His Majesty has forbidden that course of action." Marcus nodded approvingly. King William was known for his justice and mercy, qualities that made him beloved by his people but sometimes complicated matters of national security. "What about their belongings? Did we find anything that might give us a clue?" "Nothing useful. No letters, no coins from foreign lands, no identifying marks on their weapons or clothes. Whoever planned this was very thorough about covering their tracks." Marcus studied the prisoners through the one-way viewing window. Something was bothering him, something beyond their professional silence. There was an attitude about them, a sense of confidence that seemed out of place for men facing certain execution for treason and attempted regicide. "Captain Harrison," Marcus said slowly, "what if they wanted to be caught?" Harrison looked at him with surprise. "What do you mean?" "Think about it. The kidnapping was designed to force Master Edmund to provide information about court security. But they made no real effort to hide their location. The assassin in the Great Hall, he had to know he would be identified eventually if the plot succeeded. These men are acting like people who expected to be captured from the beginning. But why would they want that? Marcus felt a cold realization creeping over him. Because being in prison might be exactly where they need to be to complete their mission. The 2 captains looked at each other with growing alarm. If the prisoners were exactly where they wanted to be, if their capture was part of the plan rather than its failure, then the real danger was still to come. "We need to move them," Harrison said immediately. Get them out of the palace, away from anything they might be trying to reach or protect. But even as he spoke, they both knew it might already be too late. The prisoners had been in the palace dungeons for hours, plenty of time to accomplish whatever they had really come to do. Marcus was already moving toward the door. Double the guard around the king. Search every inch of these dungeons for anything that doesn't belong, and send word to all the royal guards to be on highest alert. As they rushed through the corridors, Marcus's mind was racing through possibilities. What could 4 men accomplish from prison cells that they couldn't accomplish while free? What was in the palace dungeons that might be valuable to conspirators? The answer hit him like a physical blow just as they reached the main security office. The treasury tunnel, he breathed. Harrison stopped dead in his tracks. What? The old tunnel that connects the dungeons to the royal treasury? It was sealed decades ago, but the entrance is still there, hidden behind a false wall in the lower levels. They both knew the implications immediately. If the conspirators had somehow managed to unseal that tunnel, they could access the royal treasury from their prison cells. But more than that, the treasury was located directly beneath the king's private chambers. Anyone who could get into the treasury could potentially reach the king himself. The 2 men ran through the palace corridors, shouting orders to guards as they passed. The palace bell began to ring, the signal for all guards to take defensive positions. Servants and courtiers pressed themselves against the walls as armed men rushed past, everyone sensing that something terrible was happening, but not knowing what. When they reached the dungeon levels, Marcus could immediately see that something was wrong. The guard who should have been posted at the entrance to the lower levels was not at his post. They found him unconscious in a storage chamber, alive but drugged. How long has he been out? Harrison asked as they tried to revive the man. The guard's eyes fluttered open, unfocused and confused. Don't know, he mumbled. Someone called me away from my post. Said there was a message. Then everything went dark. Marcus and Harrison exchanged grim looks. The conspirators had help on the inside. Someone with enough authority to call a guard away from his post without raising suspicion. They made their way deeper into the dungeons, past the cells where the 4 prisoners should have been held. The cells were empty, their doors standing open, the locks picked with professional skill. The tunnel, Harrison said grimly. They've reached the tunnel. They could hear sounds now coming from deeper in the dungeons. The scraping of stone against stone, the muffled voices of men working quickly and quietly. The conspirators were indeed at the sealed entrance to the treasury tunnel, and from the sounds they were making good progress in breaking through. Marcus drew his sword and motioned for Harrison to do the same. They would be facing 4 desperate men in the confined space of the dungeon tunnels, with the added danger that any loud disturbance might alert other conspirators who could be waiting above ground. As they crept closer to the source of the sounds, Marcus found himself thinking about young Thomas Millbrook. The child's rescue had been just the beginning, not the end of the story. His cry for help had led to the discovery of a plot that threatened the very heart of the kingdom. They rounded the final corner and saw them. The 4 escaped prisoners working frantically at the sealed entrance to the tunnel. The false wall had been partially torn away, revealing the dark opening behind it. 2 of the men were working at the stone barrier that had been built to seal the tunnel, while the other 2 stood guard. Marcus realized they had only moments before the conspirators broke through completely. Once they were in the tunnel system, they could reach the treasury and from there potentially the royal chambers themselves. The element of surprise was the only advantage he and Harrison had. Now, Marcus whispered, and both guards charged forward into the narrow corridor. The confined space worked both for and against them. The conspirators could not spread out to use their superior numbers effectively, but Marcus and Harrison also had limited room to maneuver. The fight was brutal and desperate, with the clang of steel on steel echoing off the stone walls. Marcus found himself facing 2 of the men while Harrison engaged the other 2. These were not the same defeated criminals they had captured earlier. These men fought with the fury of people whose carefully laid plans were falling apart. People who knew this was their last chance to complete their mission. The leader of the group, the same man Marcus had defeated in the warehouse, fought with particular viciousness. "You think you've won something, guard?" he snarled as their swords locked together. "You have no idea how deep this goes. We are just the beginning." "Then you'll have failed your masters," Marcus replied, using his superior strength to break the sword lock and drive the man back. and they'll have to explain how 4 professionals were stopped by the cry of a frightened child. The mention of Thomas seemed to enrage the man further, and he attacked with reckless abandon. But anger made him careless, and Marcus was able to exploit the opening. Within moments, the leader was disarmed and on the ground. Harrison had subdued his opponents as well, though not without cost. Blood seeped from a cut on his arm, and he was breathing heavily from the exertion. "Is it over?" Harrison asked, looking at the 4 men who now lay defeated once again. Marcus looked at the partially open tunnel entrance and felt a chill of foreboding. "I don't think so." They were too confident even now. "There's something else, something we're missing." As if summoned by his words, the sound of footsteps echoed from deeper in the dungeon complex, many footsteps moving with military precision. Marcus and Harrison positioned themselves at the entrance to the corridor, ready to face whatever was coming. What emerged from the shadows was not what either of them expected. A dozen men in the uniforms of palace guards led by Sir Roderick, one of the senior knights of the royal court. For a moment Marcus felt relief. Reinforcements had arrived, but something in Sir Roderick's expression killed that relief immediately. The knight's face was cold, calculating, and showed no surprise at finding the escaped prisoners or the open tunnel. "Sir Roderick," Harrison said, his voice uncertain, "thank the heavens you're here. We've recaptured the escaped prisoners and prevented them from reaching the treasury tunnel." Sir Roderick drew his sword, and the men behind him followed suit. "I'm afraid, Captain Harrison, that you have prevented nothing. You have simply delayed the inevitable." The truth hit Marcus like a physical blow. Sir Roderick was not there to help them. He was there to finish what the prisoners had started. The conspiracy reached much higher than they had imagined, all the way into the highest levels of the royal coup. The battle in the narrow dungeon corridor was unlike anything Marcus had ever experienced. 12 traitors against 2 loyal guards, with the very survival of the kingdom hanging in the balance. But Marcus and Harrison had something their enemies lacked. They were not fighting for power or ambition. They were fighting for their oath, for their king, and for the memory of a small boy whose cry for help had revealed this entire conspiracy. The confined space that had seemed like a disadvantage now became their salvation. Sir Roderick's men could not bring their superior numbers to bear effectively in the narrow corridor. Marcus and Harrison positioned themselves at a choke point where only 2 or 3 attackers could reach them at once. The fight was desperate and brutal. Marcus found himself drawing on every technique he had learned in 15 years of service, every lesson from every battle and every training session. Beside him, Harrison fought with equal determination, the 2 men moving together as if they had been partners for years rather than occasional colleagues. Sir Roderick commanded his men from behind the front lines, shouting orders and growing increasingly frustrated as his numerical advantage failed to tell. "Finish them!" he roared. "Every moment we waste here gives the king more time to escape." But Marcus caught something in the traitor knight's voice that gave him hope. Sir Roderick was worried about time, which meant the assassination attempt above had not yet succeeded. The king was still alive, still in danger, but still alive. "Your plan is failing, Roderick," Marcus called out between sword strokes. "Just like every traitor before you, you underestimated the loyalty of good men." "Loyalty to a weak king is not a virtue," Sir Roderick snarled back. "It's a disease that has infected this entire kingdom." As the battle raged, Marcus began to notice something about their attackers. These men were skilled fighters, but they were not unified in their purpose the way he and Harrison were. Some fought with the desperation of men who had committed themselves to treason and could not turn back. Others seemed to be having second thoughts, their attacks lacking conviction. Marcus made a decision that was either tactically brilliant or completely insane. In the middle of the melee, he raised his voice so that every man in the corridor could hear him. "Listen to me, all of you," he shouted. "You wear the uniform of the Royal Guard. You swore the same oath I did, the same oath Captain Harrison did. Is this what that oath meant to you? Is this the honor you promised to uphold?" Several of the attackers hesitated, their swords wavering. Marcus pressed his advantage. "Sir Roderick has lied to you. He's told you that treason is patriotism, that betrayal is loyalty. But look around you. You're fighting in the darkness, in the dungeons like common criminals. Is this the noble cause you thought you were serving? Don't listen to him," Sir Roderick commanded. "He serves a weak king who will lead this kingdom to ruin." But doubt had been planted, and doubt spread quickly through the ranks of men who were already uncomfortable with what they were being asked to do. Two of the attackers lowered their weapons entirely. A third stepped back from the fight. The boy, Marcus continued, sensing the shift in mood. Thomas Millbrook, a 6-year-old child terrorized for days because Sir Roderick needed chaos to cover his ambitions. Is that the kind of leader you want? A man who uses children as weapons? The mention of Thomas was the final blow to whatever unity Sir Roderick had managed to maintain among his followers. More weapons were lowered. More men stepped away from the fight. The tide was turning. Sir Roderick, seeing his carefully planned coup crumbling around him, drew his own sword and pushed through his remaining followers to face Marcus directly. "If I want something done properly," he snarled, "I'll do it myself." The duel between Marcus and Sir Roderick was a contest between two very different kinds of skill. Sir Roderick was a knight of the old school, trained in formal combat and tournament fighting. Marcus was a working guard who had learned his swordsmanship in the practical school of protecting real people from real threats. The fight ranged up and down the corridor, neither man able to gain a decisive advantage. Sir Roderick had slightly superior technique, but Marcus had the strength that came from righteous anger and the desperation of a man fighting for his king's life. "You cannot stop what's already begun," Sir Roderick gasped as they locked swords once again. "Even if you defeat me here, my associates will complete the mission." "Then I'll defeat them too," Marcus replied, using his superior strength to break the lock and drive Sir Roderick back. "And if there are more after them, I'll defeat them as well. That's what loyalty means, Roderick. It means never giving up, never surrendering, never betraying the trust placed in you." The final exchange was swift and decisive. Sir Roderick, growing desperate, attempted a risky attack that left him briefly exposed. Marcus's counterstrike was precise and final. The traitor knight fell to the stone floor, his ambitious dreams dying with him. The remaining conspirators, seeing their leader defeated and their cause hopeless, surrendered immediately. Captain Harrison quickly organized them into a group, while Marcus turned his attention to the most pressing concern. "The king," Marcus said urgently. "We have to reach the king." They raced through the dungeon corridors and up the stone steps, taking them 3 at a time. Behind them came the conspirators who had abandoned Sir Roderick's cause, now eager to redeem themselves by helping protect the monarch they had sworn to serve. When they burst into the main hall, they found chaos. Palace guards were running in all directions, some shouting orders, others clearly unsure what was happening. In the distance, they could hear the sound of fighting coming from the direction of the royal chambers. Marcus didn't wait for explanations or updates. He ran toward the sound of battle, Harrison and their unlikely allies close behind. They found a group of loyal guards defending the entrance to the king's private rooms against a handful of remaining conspirators. The arrival of Marcus and his group turned the tide immediately. The attackers, already outnumbered and now facing fresh opponents, quickly found themselves overwhelmed. Within minutes, the last of the treasonous plot had been crushed. King William emerged from his chambers unharmed but shaken. When he saw Marcus, his face broke into a smile of relief and gratitude. "Captain Aurelius," the king said, "once again you have saved not just a life, but the kingdom itself." Marcus knelt before his monarch, exhausted but proud. "Your Majesty, I must report that the conspiracy reached higher than we initially believed. Sir Roderick was the mastermind behind the entire plot." The king's expression grew sad. "Roderick, I trusted him, relied on his counsel. How did I miss the treason in his heart?" "Treason hides behind many masks, Your Majesty," Marcus replied. "But loyalty reveals itself in times of crisis. Today we learned who could be trusted and who could not." As the immediate crisis passed and order was restored to the palace, Marcus found himself thinking about the chain of events that had led to this moment. It had all started with the cry of a frightened child, a sound that had cut through the morning air and changed the course of history. Young Thomas Millbrook, in his innocence and terror, had been the key that unlocked a conspiracy that threatened the very foundations of the kingdom. His cries had not just summoned rescue for himself, but had set in motion the events that saved his king and his country. Later, as Marcus made his report to the royal council, he reflected on the lessons of the day. Evil often masqueraded as good, treason disguised itself as patriotism, and ambition clothed itself in the rhetoric of reform. But at the heart of it all, the simple cry of an innocent child had been enough to bring it all down. The kingdom was safe, the king lived, and justice had been served. And somewhere in the palace, a young boy named Thomas was learning his letters again, probably unaware that his voice had echoed through the corridors of power and changed the fate of nations. Sometimes, Marcus realized the most powerful force in the world was not the sword or the crown, but the simple human instinct to help those who called out for aid. Everything else, all the politics and plotting and power struggles, was just noise. But a child's cry for help? That was a sound that could move mountains, topple kingdoms, and remind everyone what truly mattered. The swift and unforgettable action that Marcus had taken that morning would indeed be remembered, not just as an act of courage, but as proof that sometimes the smallest voice can change the world.